Welcome to the ISSA web conference, Network Security Testing. Are there really different types of testing? Today's web conference is brought to you by Ixia. To explore more of ISSA's educational offerings and benefits, visit our website at issa.org. With 10,000 members and over 150 chapters in 70 countries, ISSA is committed to developing and connecting cybersecurity leaders globally. We thank our members for joining us today, and we encourage today's visitors to become a part of our growing community. During the presentation, please feel free to ask questions. To ask a question of the speaker, type your question in the chat area of your screen. You may need to click on the double arrows to open this function. Please note the Forrester Research slides will not be available post-production. If you are on Twitter, we hope you will join the conversation at #ISSA WebConf. Within 24 hours of today's event, the presentation slides and a recorded version of the webcast will be available on the ISSA web conference page, as well as an email containing a link to the post-event quiz. After the successful completion of the quiz, you will be given the opportunity to print a certificate of attendance that you can submit for CPE credits in accordance with various certifying bodies. I'm pleased to welcome our moderator for today's conference, George Orchillas, Vice President, South Florida, ISSA. George, author of Microsoft Windows 7 Administrator's Reference, holds a Master's of Science in Management Information Systems from Florida International University, leads the Advanced Penetration Testing and Vulnerability Assessment Quality Control teams in a large financial institution, and serves as Vice President of the Information Systems Security Association, South Florida Chapter. George, please begin the presentation.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone. Welcome to the ISSA web conference, Network Security Testing. Are there really different types of testing? Today you'll learn about the different kinds of security testing efforts that are commonly conducted in enterprise networks. This webinar will also cover the benefits of security resilience and associated testing for enterprises. We have 4 great speakers to discuss different aspects of this topic. We have John Kindervag, Vice President, Principal Analyst serving security and risk professionals at Forrester Research. We have Eric Reister, CISSP and CSSLP. Ira Winkler, President at SecureMentum and CISSP. And Donald Shin, Senior Technical Business Development Manager at Ixia. Please move to the next slide. John will be our first speaker. He is Vice President, a Principal Analyst serving security and risk professional at Forrester Research. He is a 25-year veteran of the high-tech world. He holds numerous industry certifications, including CISSP, CEH, QSA, and CCNA. He has particular experience in the areas of wireless security, intrusion detection and prevention, and voice over IP hacking. He has been interviewed and published in numerous magazines, including Hospitality Technology Magazine, SecurityFocus.com, and TechTarget.com. John has spoken at many security conferences and events, including TourCon, ShmooCon, and InfoSec World. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Communication from the University of Iowa. John, please begin your presentation.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next slide, please. And next slide. I'm going to be talking to you today about security testing, just a broad overview of it. Before I became an analyst, I was a security engineer and architect, and I've been a pen tester and run a pen test team, run a security assessment company for doing PCI work. So have some practitioner background, and now I'm looking at it from the other side of the house. Next slide, please. So let's talk about what's going on in the world. We've got this big breach nightmare. We've got Target. Next slide. We got Home Depot. Next one. Sony. And next one, OPM. These are the big 4 of breaches. And what's really interesting about them is not just that they were data breaches, but most importantly, that essentially all of the leadership changed because of the breach. So Sony, Target, and OPM, the heads of those organizations were either fired or were forced to retire, and the Home Depot CEO was changed out midstream, which was apparently planned. But this is the key thing, is that breaches now get the attention of business leaders, CEOs, and boards of directors. Next slide. So what's going on in the world, right? We don't understand pretty much anything that's going on in our networks. So right now we can see data that shows that 75% of compromises occur in days, right? So it takes just a short period of time for an attacker to steal all our data and get us in trouble with all the regulatory and legal bodies around security. So while today we're focusing about vulnerabilities and testing, we're doing it because we have to stop data breaches. We have to move our focus so that we're working to stop the exfiltration of toxic data into the hands of malicious actors. Next slide. Because you see, only 25% of data breaches were discovered in a matter of days. It takes a long time to find a breach, and usually breaches are not discovered by the breach party, but they're discovered by a third party. Next slide. In fact, according to the Mandy and M-Trends report, the average time to detection is 205 days. That is a long, long time to be at the mercy of an attacker. Next slide. So what are CISOs doing? Well, I believe that most of us in our business are taking a risk mitigation strategy called HOPE. I hope it doesn't happen to me. And HOPE actually stands for, at least according to me, H, put your head in the sand, O, obfuscate reality, P, point the finger at somewhere else, and E, start your employment journey. This is exactly what happened to the head of the OPM. And so if you, as an executive, are putting your head in the sand, not dealing with the reality, blaming somebody else, you're going to end up starting an employment journey very soon. Next slide. So if we look at data, Forrester does a lot of data around how security works, all kinds of IT functions. And one of the things that's interesting from our most recent survey is that 45% of companies indicate their firms have experienced a compromise or breach during the last 12 months. 16% have said that it happens 3 to 5 times. And notice that 50% say, well, we haven't had any breaches in 12 months. And that is the head in the sand part. That's the H. How would you validate or verify that you haven't had a breach? Are you doing testing to determine how easy it is to get into your networks? As a penetration tester, I could tell you that I've never seen a penetration test fail. I've never seen somebody not be able to get in. And so if people can get in, they can get data out. How are you testing for all those things? Those become big issues. Next slide. And then we look at the frequency and results. What is changing, right? Well, it always adds additional security and audit requirements. Folks, if you're upset that you're getting hit by more and more audit requirements, it's our own fault. All regulations are failures of corporate governance to do the right thing. And so we need to do this not just because compliance says we need to do it, auditors say we need to do it, but because if we do the right things, then there's not going to be a reason for them to add more regulations on top of everything that we're already doing. Next slide. So there's an incident management life cycle that we like to talk about, right? Risk analysis, threat analysis, we understand all those things. But notice the testing is part of that. you cannot test things, or you cannot know anything without testing the truth of the hypothesis. And so a lot of people say, oh, I haven't had a breach. Well, are you testing to make sure that that's a true statement? And there's lots of kinds of tests, but today we're going to be talking about vulnerability and penetration tests and those kinds of testing. And you need to be constantly testing and evaluating what you're doing in the world of InfoSec. Next slide. So we understand, everybody understands that there is a massive number of vulnerabilities that people need to deal with. Here's some stuff that we pulled through March from CVE about vulnerabilities. And I mean, the amount of vulnerabilities are overwhelming. So you're going to have to do this in a thoughtful way. And you're going to have to eventually coordinate your vulnerabilities with your data and with your system so that you can understand how to prioritize stuff. But I understand, I think the world understands that this is a difficult job. But just because it's difficult, just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. I heard Dan Kaminsky, one of the great minds in our business, say at a conference, hard is not an excuse in our business because we worship hard. Next slide. So vulnerabilities are plaguing companies, right? Software vulnerabilities, that's a big one. Web application vulnerabilities, SQL injections, cross-site scripting, remote file inclusion, all that kind of stuff. These are things that are plaguing organizations, and we hear a lot about, about modern-day malware, APTs. We hear about nation-state sponsored stuff. We hear a lot about dropping malware. We hear a lot about kill chains. But a lot of the basic exploits are still easy to do, and I still see a ton of SQL injection available out there on the internet. As soon as you put something and connect it to the internet, first of all, we all live in the same bad neighborhood, so you can't just move to a suburb of the internet. There are no suburbs. Secondly, you're directly connected to the world's worst attackers. Third, as soon as you put any application and make it available to the internet, now they have access to it. I mean, it's just they can do whatever they want to with it, and you have to be monitoring and testing that all the time. And then finally, you can't define probabilities around these kinds of attacks because you're directly connected and adjacent to all attackers in the entire world through the internet. The only thing keeping you from being attacked is probably the will of the attacker. They just don't want to right now. So those are going to be really difficult things to deal with. And so be very aware of that threat environment. Go ahead to the next one. So when we asked about priorities, assessing threats and vulnerabilities is the top priority for decision makers around the world of security. And this is because that's something that we can understand, that's reportable, and that leads to breaches. In order to have an exploit and a breach, you have to have a vulnerability first, and that's why there's been so much focus on vulnerabilities. Next slide. So how do you look at it, right? Well, I think the most useful framework is actually PCI. PCI, whether you love it or hate it, it makes a great framework, and we organized it into a logical framework here. We call it the PCI Unleashed framework, and you can see how I've laid it out in a different way other than the way PCI lays it out so that you can understand it more logically. But today I want to just quickly touch on requirement 11 around testing. Next slide. Because the things that are in requirement 11 are probably the best baseline to understand how to do security testing. Next slide. So if we look at that, it talks about tests for the presence of wireless access points in 11.1. Wireless is often the least secured part of our network, and the reason is partially that we've made a bad terminology for it. We call it a WLAN, wireless LAN. It's not a LAN, it is an internet. And so you absolutely need to treat it that way. If you've got your wireless network bridged directly to your wired network, you're toast. And wireless networks are very, very easy to attack. It talks about how to run internal and external vulnerability scans, internal and external penetration tests, and then notice that it talks about intrusion detection and prevention systems within the world of security testing. Those kinds of systems that monitor the network also provide a huge testing benefit to modern organizations. Next slide. So what are the types of tests? There's a lot of different types of tests, right? You have network vulnerability scanning. This is what's on the wired network, what things are attached to it. That's your basic, what we think about as vulnerability scanning. And a lot of times vulnerability management has become synonymous with network vulnerability scanning. But there's a lot more that you actually need to do. Wireless scanning. This is, again, something that's underutilized because it's hard to do. It's hard to do manually. So you need to automate this in one way, shape, or another. You need to know what is trying to attack my wireless access points. You need to know which are approved access points on my network versus interfering access points versus rogue access points. If there are rogue access points on your network, do you know that? Can you shut those down? Then we talk about doing penetration testing. Can somebody get into our network? And this is an important thing to think about within context, because the answer is almost always yes, but you need to look at it from a repeatability standpoint and find flaws that are easily exploitable. And so just because there's a successful or unsuccessful penetration test doesn't mean the whole system is down, because a lot of times it's dependent upon the skill of the potential attacker. But I think one of the real values of penetration testing is to show those results to executives to help them understand how hackers think, because this is a hacker perspective or a malicious adversary perspective on your network. And so that will help business leaders understand the threat environment. Then web app scanning. This is really, really important. What do the attackers see when they scan the internet and they scan your web applications? Talking to one researcher, he told me that every web app on the internet is scanned at least 5,000 times a day. That was his statistic from his research. So that's an amazing amount of stuff that's happening, and it may well be that attackers know more about the potential vulnerabilities in your web applications than you do. I talked to another researcher who discovered that there were big databases that certain attacker groups had of all of the vulnerabilities that they found on the World Wide Web, so that they could know where the target-rich environments are. That's pretty amazing. Then you have static and dynamic code review. And these are the way you look at software before, during, and after deployment of software. So you need to actually not just look at the network and whether it's wired or wireless, whether it's on the web, you also need to look at the software itself, the applications. And so these kinds of things help you do that. Next slide. And you can see there's tremendous value in a lot of these kinds of things. This is our TechRadar on application security, where we show the value of a lot of these kinds of things. But especially when you look at dynamic application security testing and static application security testing, you're going to see a huge value to your organization when we look at the trajectory. And so those are things, the value is large, it's high, there's a lot of ROI when you compare the cost of a data breach, which always starts at 7 figures, always. Next slide. So there's a vulnerability management life cycle, right? And you've probably heard about it: discover, assess, report, remediate, validate. And it's constant, and it's not a point in time. It's not just for an audit. It has to be continuous. We hear about continuous monitoring. There has to be some level of continuous testing. If you're doing this just to check a compliance checkbox, then you're probably toast. So you don't want to, if you're using HOPE as your risk mitigation strategy and you don't want to get down to phase E, employment journey, you better rethink your testing strategy. Next slide. So that's my information. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, engage in conversations, and I'm going to turn it over to my friends at ISSA.
Thank you very much, John, for your presentation. As a reminder, you can ask questions right here on the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will ask those questions as we go. We will also have time at the end to ask all of our speakers questions. So the first question I have here, John, is what do I do if I don't have to abide by PCI? Do I still need to, do any of this?
Yeah, you still need to. This is still a best practice, and the best way to understand the best practice is using PCI. I recommend that all my clients use the PCI Unleash framework and base what they're doing on PCI, because it's much better than any other tactical set of controls like ISO or NIST, which I call compliance by cheerleading. So use PCI to undergird it, and you will be very grateful. In fact, when I have a client who switches from a company who has to do PCI to one that doesn't, they're sorry that they don't have to do PCI, because it makes it much harder to get the budget and incentivize good security practices at their organizations. So definitely use the same set of baseline things, and then you'll be much more successful.
Excellent. Thank you, John. I think we have time for one more question, and this one is, I get too many results. What do I do with all this data, with all this information?
Yeah, prioritizing it is really, really hard, right? And if you do it just based upon a risk score, this is a level 5. Again, that's going to not be very effectual, because it's a level 5 compared to what? You have to put it in the context of your own organization. First of all, do I have this, right? I mean, how relevant is this to me? But most importantly, is there toxic data attached to this system? And toxic data is we call it the 4 Ps: PCI, credit card data; PHI, healthcare data; PII, personally identifiable information; or IP, intellectual property. Those 4 things cover most of the data that we need to protect in the world. And we need to look at a vulnerability and say, hey, does this give a malicious attacker an ability to steal some type of toxic data? And if so, then we need to up that prioritization. And there may be vulnerabilities that are out there that are, level 5 vulnerabilities or whatever, that somebody is making a big noise about, but the systems don't really connect to anything from a data perspective, and so those should be decremented.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John. We'll save all other questions for the end. Please continue to submit them, as we will try to get to them as we go. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker on the next slide. Eric, CISSP, CSLP, was most recently the manager of secure software development at Attachmate Corporation. It has more than 18 years of testing and development experience with Attachmate security products. He has worked with all Attachmate product teams to collaboratively incorporate secure development practices into their software development methodologies through educating the development teams on all aspects of the SDLC. He also initiated and coordinated Attachmate's vulnerability management and publication team and process. Eric previously worked as a geophysicist on the oil industry and has degrees in geology and oceanography. Eric, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, George, and good day to everyone. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm going to approach this more from a software testing side as opposed to directly pen testing because of my experience there. The whole idea of pen testing in general is, as John mentioned in the previous set, to approach the system under test as an attacker would. That's what you're trying to do with pen testing. I will say, however, as you saw in his life cycle, pen testing occurs very late in the cycle of being able to manage the security of your network. And if I'm a vendor, or if I'm developing software for the consumer market out there, I actually want to be doing things a lot sooner than pen testing. Pen testing is essentially the final checkbox to go through to say, okay, we really built this solidly, and it's working the way it should be, and it's as secure as we can get it at the point where we release this. Now, if I'm a consumer of that particular software or that particular system, I still need to do pen testing, because the vendor can't pen test in all of the environments that I have, and in fact may not even have anything close to the environment that I'm using. So it needs to be done both from the vendor side, and it needs to be done by the consumer to ensure that when it's configured and set up on their systems, that it is as secure as it possibly can be. Now, the process of pen testing, I took this directly from the SANS ethical hacking classes. Essentially, you go through a planning stage, you'll go through a scoping stage where you decide what it is you're going to pen test. Then you do a reconnaissance stage where you look at what the things are within scope, what's available to the attacker, and then you'll start scanning and looking for vulnerabilities. Once you find vulnerabilities, you actually have to exploit them. The fact that you have a vulnerability may not mean that it's something that you even have to worry about if it's not exploitable. And then finally, you'll be doing the documentation and reporting. We can go ahead to the next slide, please. So the purpose is, as I said, we're to approach the system under test as an attacker. So for in-house developed applications or services, we should be doing white box testing. The reason that we're doing white box testing is we should know what the attack surface looks like, what the threats are to the system, and therefore we can skip some of the steps that we had in the previous process slide. We probably don't need to do the scoping. We probably need to do minimal planning and minimal reconnaissance, and we'll spend most of our time in the scanning and exploitation stages, and then of course doing the reports and the follow-up on it. But if I'm a customer who's got this deployed, and I've got purchased products or purchased systems out there, I may need to do the full set of processes out there, because I may not know what all is available, what the vendor has made available to me. Now, that said, it is possible to request attack surface analysis from your vendor. And in fact, I encourage people to do that. I'm hoping to see a lot more of that happen from the vendor side to make attack surface analysis available to the customers so that they can do the penetration testing a lot more simply. Especially if you've got systems that are deployed on virtual servers and cloud deployments, scoping is really, really important. You want to make sure that you limit your pen testing to the systems that are your systems and not to Amazon's or Microsoft's or Google's hypervisors that you probably shouldn't be pen testing, because you may end up in somebody else's space if you're successful. So you do have to be careful about scoping things out and making sure that you do things correctly. Also, what do you do with the findings if you have deployed systems and you have purchased products from a vendor? Who's going to fix those problems? Do you have a good relationship with your vendor? Do you have a way of reporting your findings back to the vendor and asking them, number one, is it a misconfiguration issue, or is this something that is an actual vulnerability and a bug in the system that needs to be fixed? You need to make sure that you develop good relationships with your vendors to be able to, after you've done the pen testing, take the findings, deliver those to the vendor, and then expect to get a reasonable time to get the fixes out and patches back to yourself. Okay, next slide, please. So what are the different types of pen testing that we have? What is the object of our system? So if we're looking at the network, the main thing we're looking at is misconfigurations and weak settings. If we're looking at web apps and services, as John said, this was one of the major attack points right now for attackers, and major scan points. We want to make sure that the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities have been handled. And if we're looking at mobile apps and services, we want to make sure that the permissions are set up properly on the mobile apps so that we don't get data leakage. There are two major attack methods that we utilize. The first one is the known vulnerability scans. For the most part, these can be automated. In the next few slides, I'll actually be talking about and enumerating some of the products that are out there available to pen testers that can be used to do both the vulnerability scans and the exploitation proofs. Just be aware that the known vulnerability scans, in most cases, there'll be an automated scan that you'll do on your system. Take the results, which may be quite a few results, prioritize them, and then do the exploitation proofs, because in most cases a vendor isn't really going to be going to care a lot, and you may not even care a lot if a vulnerability is found but it can't be exploited, or at least not that you know of. In most cases, the exploitation proofs will not be automated. You will have to do some of these things manually. All right, next slide, please. So there are a number of pen test toolkits available that provide a lot of the tools, multiple tools that you can utilize to do scoping, reconnaissance, vulnerability scans, and exploit tests, and in some cases even reporting. The three main ones that I'm familiar with and have utilized and can recommend are Kali Linux, the Samurai Web Test Framework if you're doing web app, and then Pony Express. These will provide you a lot of different kinds of tools. Some of these are freeware, some of these are commercial. The commercial ones in most cases will have a lot better UI, may have a lot better reporting structures, and may have a lot easier tools to use, but I believe that all of these essentially will give you the same sort of functionality, whether you're whether you're more familiar with one or the other. Utilize what you're familiar with to be able to do the pen testing. In a lot of cases, the scanners that are in these pen test tools are automatable. But again, you have to be aware of that the scanners will usually only find publicly reported vulnerabilities. They will not find 0 days for you. Those have to be done usually manually in the exploit tests. Okay, next slide, please. So here are some tools that you can utilize for vulnerability scanning. Probably the most familiar one that we all know about is Nessus. That is a commercial tool. There is a freeware version of it called OpenVAS. It does not have all the functionality, needless to say, that Nessus does have, but again, it might be a good starting point. Some of the other ones here, I have utilized Burp Suite, which comes both in the freeware and the commercial version, and the Z-Attack proxy. And some of these others as well that I've seen available online. I have not utilized them and don't have any direct experience with them. But again, the Nexpose and Core Impact are both commercial, and I believe that there are there are the capabilities to utilize those and actually get some help from the vendors to help you out to set up the vulnerability scans. Again, be aware that vulnerability scans will only find exploits, or sorry, vulnerabilities that are known to the public. and will not be able to find 0 days for you. All right, next slide, please. Once you've found a vulnerability, it is important to prove that that vulnerability is exploitable. The reason for this is that if it's just a vulnerability, yes, it's something that probably should be fixed, but if it's exploitable, particularly if it's exploitable on existing, on the existing Metasploit or Canvas systems that are out there, you need to be aware that probably somebody is going to exploit it against you because they know that they found that vulnerability on your system, and therefore now they've got a tool that's able to actually utilize that. One of the things to be aware of as well is with vulnerabilities, in most cases it's not just a single vulnerability that is utilized for exploit. It is usually multiple vulnerabilities that are chained together, and so in most cases these chains are already created in Metasploit and in Canvas so that you can utilize both of those systems to go out and look at your vulnerabilities and make sure that the ones that are exploited you either have patched or you have got a workaround in place or you've got protected in some fashion so that these vulnerabilities can't be chained all the way through. Okay, next slide, please. Web app exploit tools. There are a number of them out there. Again, these are the ones that I'm familiar with are Burp Suite and the Z-Attack proxy. Burp Suite has both a free and commercial version. The commercial version is the one that's going to be most easily automatable. The free version does not have the automatable tools or automation tools included in it. Z-Attack proxy, which is free from OWASP. That one has both a vulnerability scanner built into it and the capability for exploit, and it actually does have a interface, REST interface that can be utilized to automate the tool for the vulnerability scanning and partially for the exploit as well. Peros proxy is another one, W3AF and NetSparker. I'm not as familiar with those, but I know that those are out there as well. And again, the W3AF and NetSparker, I believe, are commercial tools. And again, you may be able to get assistance from the vendor of those tools to help you set things up and utilize them for exploit. Next slide. Yeah, Android exploits. These are the ones that I have heard about. I have not actually done any mobile exploits or mobile pen testing myself, but these are the types of tools that are available. Pony Express has, what I've seen at various security conferences, it has a really comprehensive set of mobile pen testing tools as well as for web apps. The other three I'm not that familiar with, but looking at, you'll see some of the resources that I have later on, looking at some of the security code web pages out there that show the tools. They're fairly highly rated for Android exploits. Next slide. For iPhone and Apple, in most cases, you'll be using the standard Linux pen test tools. What I am aware of for iPhone exploits is that you will have to rootkit your phone in order to be able to install these Linux pen tests. It sort of means that you're not really testing the true environment of most of your customers who will be utilizing the iPhone apps. But it is the only way to get the pen testing tools on and running on the iPhone is you will have to rootkit it, and then you can look at standard Linux pen test tools that you can install on the Linux based system of the iPhone. And then there's a new tool out there. I'm not familiar with it, but I have heard some good things about it through my network called Analyzer, and you can take a look at their website as well. Okay, couple things to think about in summary. pen testing is important, but pen testing is not enough. Pen testing, as I said, is something that you're doing at the very end of the cycle, either as a vendor yourself who is creating your applications, or as a consumer of vendors' applications when you have it deployed in your test environments to ensure that before you deploy it out into the public environment that things are secure. Just like software testing doesn't create quality applications, pen testing and security testing doesn't guarantee secure applications. All it does is tell you where your problems are and what you need to fix, what you need to be aware of. And so it is important that you do have a good feedback mechanism either into your own development teams to be able to report to them where vulnerabilities are and what needs to get fixed, and also into your vendors so that you can report to them your findings and get things fixed that are important to you. Vulnerability scans by themselves are definitely not enough. They will show you where vulnerabilities are. They may even help you prioritize some of them, but it still doesn't tell you whether that vulnerability is exploitable in your environment. So it is important to do the exploit testing as well, because it proves that a vulnerability is important enough to fix. A couple things to think about. You might want to consider, particularly on the exploit testing part, which is the one that requires the most knowledge, is consider contracting experts to come in. Yes, it will be more expensive. They will be able to come in and help you out and may even be able to help set up for you automated repeatable testing to help you out in subsequent cycles of your test process. The other thing that you, particularly as a vendor, may want to consider is a bug bounty program. The bug bounty programs that are out there essentially allow a security researcher to responsibly report vulnerabilities to vendors and allows vendors time to fix those before the vulnerabilities become public. And this is the best way to get good eyes on it that you may not be able to afford. It also allows you to have testers that don't think the same way that your testers necessarily do. Look at your applications or look at your networks from an outside perspective and see what's actually available to attackers out there, and yet still get essentially fairly inexpensive testing. The one thing to be aware of is the recent Wassenaar agreement that has been signed may put a little bit of a crimp in both bug bounty programs and security researchers by making it almost illegal to take pen testing tools, export them to other countries, and then utilize them across international borders. So you need to make sure that you consider the legal aspects of the Wassenaar agreement with both contracting experts and with bug bounty programs. The end point of what we do here, what the important thing is going to be, though, is if you don't do pen testing yourself, whether you're a vendor or you are a consumer of products, the hackers will. And it's better that you do it yourself, because then you have control of the situation and you can get things fixed, and you'll also be more aware, and you won't be in the situation that John was talking about earlier, where you're hoping that that your network security is up to snuff. And with that, I think my next slide is on some resources and some contact information for me. These are the web pages that you can look at to see some of the tools that I talked about and their ratings and what they do. and these are good resources to bookmark and utilize if you're a pen tester. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Eric. We have here a quick question, and then, as I said, we will take the rest at the end of the webcast. The question I want to cover right now is penetration testing seems to require quite a bit of specialization. Can an in-house pen tester be as effective as contractors?
The answer to that one is yes, they can. There's two reasons for that. Number one is that, as I mentioned before, in-house pen testers have the advantage that they can do white box testing. They know what the application is like. They should know what the attack surface is like. They can be more efficient than a contract tester. Now, that said, if you provide the information to contract testers, that you have the same information that you have in-house to make it possible for them to be able to do white box testing and not have to do full reconnaissance and scans, then contract testers can also be efficient, and they will be better in that they're more familiar with the tools unless you have a good pen testing organization in-house.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We will now go on to our next presenter, and I remind you can ask questions, and we will cover them at the end. Our next speaker is Ira Winkler. He is president of Securementum at CISSP. He is considered one of the world's most influential security professionals and has been named a modern-day James Bond by the media. He did this by performing espionage simulations where he physically and technically broke into some of the largest companies in the world and investigated crimes against them, telling them how to cost-effectively protect their information and computer infrastructure. He continues to perform these espionage simulations as well as assist organizations in developing cost-effective security programs. Ira also won the Hall of Fame Award from the Information Systems Security Association, the 2013 CSO Compass Award, as well as several other prestigious industry awards. I'd like to now turn over the presentation to Ira. Ira, take it away.
Hi there. Let's see. So anyway, regarding my presentation, I'm going to actually take a different, like the past presentation was on testing applications and the like. This is going to be penetration testing in the way it was originally done for actually trying to penetrate companies and everything like that. Just a quick note with regard to also, if you're going to test applications, also consider fuzz testing, and you can look that up, but that's a good way of doing kind of like white box / black box testing without knowing anything. So when I started doing things, I became famous for doing these penetration tests. And actually, why don't you go on to the next slide? I think it's a little bit more, it'll be a little bit more descriptive. What happened was I made my reputation by taking over banks, doing a whole bunch of other things like that, doing primarily social engineering, doing a little bit of hacking, and as opposed to calling them penetration tests, doing espionage simulations. And how I define that is generally with espionage simulations, you are essentially trying to grab a company by what's valuable and really making them squirm. And by targeting the value as opposed to targeting, you know, just saying we got access to the company, so ha-ha. You know, the goal of espionage, frankly, is to gather information which is valuable to you. Likewise, penetration tests, you know, you're supposed to kind of break in, but, you know, like has been implied in the past, sometimes just because you can break in, it doesn't mean you're going to get anything valuable out of it. So that's how I kind of define the difference a little bit. But, you know, basically, I've done things that, you know, I'm kind of proud of the things I've done in some ways. But when you look at the things, it's like, you know, planted malware on power grids, stole billions of dollars, had the ability to cripple global 50 companies. Again, it sounds all incredible and everything like that. Next slide, please. The reality, I could have given the clients most of the same recommendations by not doing all of that stuff. Yes, what I did was notable. Yes, what I did grabbed people's attention. But what I'm going to talk about is what's the real purpose of being a security professional? The real purpose of being a security professional is to figure out how to actually secure stuff. And I know that sounds, that sounds basic, but it's amazing how many people lose track of that. The actual penetration was frequently a waste of time because, again, my goal was not to penetrate a company in theory, but yes, that's what they pay me to do. But the goal of a penetration test is to hopefully protect the organization. Next slide, please. So this comes down to it. A lot of people who do penetration testing like to portray themselves, I'm a hacker. If somebody says, I'm a hacker, so you should hire me because I'm a hacker, don't hire them. Because frankly, the goal is you want to hire security professionals who might happen to hack. You want to have a person who says, yes, I know how to get into an organization, but at the end of the day, I can get into it, and as a result of me getting into it, you're going to have a more secure organization. There's a difference between being able to break something and being able to fix it. And let me give a clear example. It's really easy to take a light bulb and break it. It doesn't mean you can put that light bulb back together. It doesn't mean you can go ahead and start to fix things. It doesn't mean that, well, you broke the light bulb, now you know how to create, how to make a new light bulb to replace it. Yes, the fact it breaks is one thing. The reality, though, is it's more important to say, well, this light bulb is here, and I need to know how to keep it working and keep it fixed so that it doesn't break in the future. And again, I realize a lot of people don't understand that being able to break something and knowing how to fix it is a completely separate beast, and you've got to understand that. Your goal is when you break into things, you can't say, I broke into this, so now fix that, because there could be 1,000 other holes. And that's the problem with a penetration test. They frequently find one way to get in and say, fix this, and that's the focus. But then you go on, and there's thousands of other things that remain to be fixed. Next, please. Here's what I've been kind of implying. Penetration tests tend to be a game of gotchas. Too many people, they like to go around, they like to say, look at what we got, isn't this great, aren't we special and all that stuff. And, to a certain extent, that's okay if the goal of a penetration test is to prove to management that there's a problem. And sometimes it sadly needs to be done, that people don't realize that there is a problem. Like there was one organization and they said, there's no way you're getting in. And it's like, there's always a way to get in. But if somebody has the attitude, there's no way to get in, yes, maybe you need to go ahead and prove something like that. But even if that's the case, your goal shouldn't be just to prove you can get in. Your goal should be to provide actionable information to figure out how to fix how you got in, and ideally, even on a grander scale, fix these systematic problems that are in place that allowed you to get in. So you're not just looking to repair the specific attack vector that'll let you in, but you're looking to find as many attack vectors as possible that you could have also exploited at the same time. Next slide, please. Gotchas are worthless. Again, parading around saying, look how special I am because I got something from you, completely useless. Except, of course, unless the company really needed to be demonstrated that they are vulnerable. But for the most part, even if you show them that without telling them how to fix it, it is worthless. Next, please. Okay, so this slide is not how it's intended to be. Could you go to the next slide, please, and see if it steps through this? Okay, go back a slide then. Okay, so let's try to talk this through. This is a case study on, putting malware on an industrial control system or whatever. So what happened was this was a case where the company basically went ahead and said, there's no way you're getting in. So I was asked by a penetration company to say, well, how can we get into the network? Once we get on the network, we know how to take over their industrial control systems or whatever, but, we need to figure out a way to get in. So what happened was I figured out, okay, so there's a user group for the industrial control system software. So what I did was we got that list, and we also found out that the targeted company was going through a merger. So we took the list and created a message to the people who were on the user group list who would clearly be sitting on both the control systems and their email if they overlap their business network with their control system. So we went ahead and sent a targeted inflammatory email that said to the effect that the company's going through a merger, that there's going to be a worst of both worlds benefits package. So in other words, if you were at company A and you got 15 days a year off for leave, and company B had 10 days a year off for leave, you were going to go with 10 days a year off for leave or something like that. So put a message together like that and sent it to the user group for the people inside the company, or that subset of the user group for people who are inside the company. We sent it to them with a link to say, here's the link to the article. The article went to a web server, which we, kind of had a list like company-hr.com. That was the domain that it got sent to. And what happened was when they went ahead and clicked on the link returned a 404 error, supposedly, or that's what we displayed on the system, but it also downloaded malware onto the systems. So what happened was people got the email message, they went ahead, clicked on the link, they had malware downloaded onto the network. What happened then was we had full control of the system, and more important though, the company said there's no way you're getting in, so therefore you could do whatever you want, which is why pretty much why I came up with the tactic, because this is not something I would recommend, that you send an inflammatory message without real permission and say, they said it would never work. Anyway, there was apparently a 5,000% plus hit rate, because what happened was the people who clicked on the message not just attempted to click on the message, but they also forwarded it to people around the company. So a lot of people around the company were also downloading the malware onto their systems. So anyway, that's pretty much a case study on how to take over, in this case, power grid systems, really just by sending a simple message out. Next slide, please. What did that prove? That SCADA systems were open to viruses or malware? People knew that already. That there's one port open to the outside world? Again, people knew that. Control and business networks overlap? Again, everybody knew that. They didn't want to realize it's a vulnerability, but everybody knew that. Likewise, employees were susceptible to spear phishing messages taking advantage of a merger. Who wouldn't know that? And which of the things warranted the effort? Really, that list of recommendations could have come up without going through the whole process of doing it. Next slide, please. What should penetration tests really be, though? When you start looking at all this, it should be a deeper vulnerability assessment, because you generally have audits, assessments, and penetration tests. That's the gist of different types of security assessments, if you want to call it that. So an audit is basically, you have a standard and you have to review a system compared to the standard. That's essentially what an audit is. Hopefully the standard, whether it's SSE 16, whether it's COBIT, whether it's whatever it is, you have a theoretical standard and you're saying, do we meet these security controls? That's an audit. An assessment is much more of a free-formed review of potential vulnerabilities. It can include scanning, it can include manual techniques or whatever. A penetration test is essentially an assessment, but with the goal of actually exploiting the vulnerabilities found to gather information or to see what could happen and somebody performing the assessment go a step further. In other words, what could a theoretical hacker get? It should, however, be, and this is a critical issue, it should be a systematic approach to consistently identifying vulnerabilities across an organization. It shouldn't be a random thing where you get one result one time, a completely different result another time. And sometimes with a penetration test that's going to happen, maybe depending upon who you bump into accidentally, what attack structure you use, who's at their desk and who isn't at their desk, if there's social engineering involved or whatever. But, you know, this should be really a much deeper vulnerability assessment. Next slide, please. You know, and let's talk about making them useful. When you look at testing, really what you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure you don't have a one-time test. Because I could promise you, if somebody comes to me and says, Ira, I want you to do a penetration test, I'll be, okay, fine, I'll do it. And I will get them incredibly notable results. That's a given. Then if they just come back to me and say, okay, we fixed everything, we'd like you to do a penetration test again, and I'd be like, any penetration test? Everybody like, yes. I could get them as consistent or as significant results using some different attack vector. That's just because how it happens. Now, the reality is I can do that. It's a lot of fun for me, and that's all well and good. But I would prefer to do something that's repeatable so that I can tell whether or not there's improvement throughout the organization. You want to go ahead and design tests that are repeatable to see if there's consistent technical or human vulnerabilities across the organization. You know, it should be able to measure the organization and determine if there's different behaviors in different organizations. So let me give you an example. When I do social engineering assessments, what I like to do is I like to say, look, I want to know how many people are in the company. You tell me, okay, there's 10,000 people in the company. Where are they located? They'll say some are, you know, like let's say 5,000 are at location A, 2,000 are at location B, 3,000 at location C. I want to go ahead and make sure 50% of my potential targets that are at location A, 20% at location B, 30% at location C, and statistically sample, randomize within those samples. Because what does it say if I get 100% success rate and I just target location B with just 20% of the people? Yeah, maybe that's a good representation of what it's like at location B, but if I don't know what it's like at locations A and C, I don't know what the awareness level is there, and it's unfair of me to generalize the organization. But let's say I go back next time on the second test and try to repeat it, and I go ahead and I target just location C in that case, and location C, I get 100% failure rate. In other words, I can't get in. That means that I compare location B to location C, and how do I know like one isn't like a high, you know, like location C isn't an intelligence organization where they're trained not to answer the phone, you know, and be skeptical, and location B, which might just be a call center where they're always trained to answer the phone. So again, you need to construct for repeatability. You need to construct for representation across the organization. You know, ideally takes into account demographics and job functions as well, so that you get a representative sampling. Like again, there's a difference between a person in the mailroom answering the phone and a person at the help desk answering the phone. And I want to make sure that I get the representation across the board to see where the consistency is. Likewise, if I'm penetrating systems as opposed to people, you have to understand that there might be some really, really good system administrators at one location and relatively poor system administrators at another location, and the results of a hacking penetration test are going to be significantly different compared to who the system administrator is. So again, you want to try to get a cross-sampling of a penetration test to get, again, to generalize as best as possible and repeat as best as possible to see where there's improvement. Next slide, please. The key for this is you have to do data collection in advance if you're going to do an organizational penetration test, espionage simulation, or whatever. You have to figure out demographically, you know, where the people are. You have to figure out, you know, are there geographical considerations? Are there different management structures? And again, you got to figure out what's the best way to take a representative sampling of the entire organization you're dealing with. So this way you can plan things in advance as to what percentage of systems or people or whatever you want to target from a given location. Next slide, please. Another issue, and this is where penetration testers really fail in my opinion. One goal I have in a penetration test is to be caught. I actually do have a goal to be caught. You know, I sometimes, if I get in and I'm doing a representative test, I want to see what it takes to catch me. So, for example, yes, I can get in using an advanced way, and if I get in using an advanced way, you know, I got the gotcha, and that's all well and good. But I want to see at what level of basic attack are the people actually going to say, hey, I've been caught. So from a technical perspective, you know, if I can get in using a 0-day vulnerability that's been announced but not, you know, patched, and I get in there, great. But then I might also try, well, can I get in with a vulnerability that was announced, you know, and patchable 4 days ago? Or can I get in with a vulnerability that was patched 9 months or should have been patched 9 months ago? Again, you need to figure out what it takes to be caught, because too many people forget that there's a triad for security: protection, detection, and reaction. At some point, you need to figure out what it takes to be detected. Where is the bar to be detected within an organization? Because detection is, in my opinion, is as important, and if not infinitely more important, than protection, because there's a whole bunch of issues. You know, you need to see if they react correctly. Like, let's say somebody detects you. So if I do a social engineering test and somebody asks me for a password and they say no, that's good. What's better is if they call up and report that. So you need to figure out, is the reaction there in place as well? So anyway, that's the next. Anyway, next slide, please. So another thing to do is structure the report in advance if you want to do a great penetration test. It's great to have the tables laid out. So, for example, have, you know, as a high point, do something along the lines of saying, you know, I have 50% in location A, 20% location B, 30% location C, and then you have, you know, success rate in locations A, B, and C. So really, by the time you actually finish the test, all you need to do is fill in the blanks and get everything, you know, you just need to fill in the blanks of the report. You know, it might involve tables, locations. For technology, it might involve, you know, data center location, whatever it happens to be. It might involve, you know, breakdown by roles, whether, you know, you like there are system administrators versus help desk people versus, you know, end users, or whatever the case is. So what you need to do if you're doing a useful penetration test is to proactively look for what you're looking for. I know that sounds repetitive. I know that sounds redundant, but very few people do it. Again, they tend to do a penetration test or a, you know, vulnerability assessment as a game of gotcha, and that's not what you're looking to do. Next slide, please. Another thing, if you're doing social engineering, the pretexts have to be specifically defined. In other words, when I do a penetration test, I go ahead and we operate off a script. We don't go ahead and randomly try to say, okay, well, I'm going to keep going until I finally get the person. And yes, it doesn't take a lot of work to keep going until somebody finally fails. But what you need to do is you need to say, hey, do these people understand the value of a password, as an example? So I'll go ahead. I'll say, hey, I'm with the help desk. I need to see if your antivirus software is updated. So if I could log on to your system, that would be great. Please provide me your user ID and password. And if they say no, I can go ahead and I can elevate it. I'm sorry, I appreciate your security aware. In that case, can you go ahead and please open up your registry file and, you know, add this to the registry file, so that way you can look at it yourself and manipulate the person further. The reality, though, is, yes, I can keep doing that, but I need to know at what level are people from an awareness perspective, so I can then target awareness training that's appropriate for the organization. Because clearly, if they recognize the importance of a user ID and password, that's great. But then do they recognize the importance of, like, not taking actions on behalf of somebody who calls in, not giving out information about other employees throughout the organization, and a variety of other issues. So you want to make sure, again, that if you're doing social engineering, the pretexts are specifically defined so you can measure to that to know if you're having improvement over a period of time. Next slide, please. or actually just quickly going back, go back one more slide because there's an important thing on the bottom. How that impacts everything. I mentioned phishing campaigns. People have phishing campaigns, and again, if you just do a standard phishing campaign that says, oh, we have a UPS, here's your UPS shipment is here, please click on this link, or please open up this file. That is nice and one thing, but what you need to do is you need to vary the sophistication levels of phishing messages as well. You need to go ahead and say, hey, I realize people are not going to go ahead and, some people recognize a phishing message, but then how many people are going to recognize a more targeted message? And your success rate should keep going up. So, basic sophistication, medium sophistication, high sophistication. And you should constantly be raising the bar, because I'll tell you one thing, if you're running a phishing simulation and you're bragging about getting phishing results down to 0, what you're saying is you're wasting a lot of money and a lot of opportunity. You should constantly be raising the bar, and a good phishing simulation methodology should actually have the hit rates go up and down in a very targeted way as you start elevating the level of sophistication through your phishing program. Now you can go to the next slide, please. So anyway, in conclusion, penetration tests need to be more than a game of gotchas unless the company really wants to be ignorant about the problem. You need to be in order to do that, you have to design the test proactively. You should design tests for repeatability. Target sophistication levels low to high so you can actually measure where you are, where the organization is from technical and human perspectives. And again, I want to keep reiterating, in a penetration test, there's nothing wrong with being caught. Clearly, at some level, you try to avoid it, but you want to see what happens. Where does detection kick in? Where does reaction kick in? Is reaction appropriate to the detection? Because that's as important, if not more important, than anything else that you're going to do. Anyway, I think I am. Next slide, please. Okay, I am done.
All right. Thank you very much, Ira. Again, I'd like to remind everyone to submit questions right on the GoToWebinar control panel. So, Ira, we have a question here. How do you create the most impact after performing a penetration test once it's actually done?
What you have to do is, if you really want to create impact, you need to go ahead and design and translate what you did to business results. You need to say, here's what could have happened should this test have been performed by an outside party. Here's how little resources it took for us to get these devastating results to the organization, assuming, of course, there were devastating results. The issue is not to talk technology, and I'll give one quick example. One of my early penetration tests, the CISO of the company, had 4 different companies perform penetration tests, and all 4 companies came back 2 weeks and $100,000 later and said, we have full control of your entire network. The CISO ran into the CEO who said, okay, let me understand this. I have been one of the most profitable companies in the world. I have been vulnerable. I am one of the most profitable companies in the world. I am vulnerable. I will be one of the most profitable companies in the world. Any idea why I shouldn't be vulnerable? And so then he called, then I went in, and he called me, and he's like, I need you to do one of these things. And so 3 days later, the CISO went back to the CEO of the company and said, oh, here's all our mergers and acquisitions schedule. Here's our technology coming out in 3 years. Here's this, here's that, here's financial plans, here's personnel data, here's all this that they got within 3 days, and by the way, they have full control of our entire network. And he bumped up his security budget by $10 million the following week. So that's an example of showing pure business value, not just saying we got you from a technical perspective.
Got it. Excellent. Thank you. One more question here before we move on to our next speaker. What type of training should you have to be able to perform a high-quality penetration test?
Generally, as far as training goes, I think what obviously I'd love people to be trained from an intelligence perspective because that's where they truly have value. That's where they truly know how not to go in and be caught and not do damage. because part of it, I've seen too many penetration tests where people just go out and perform tests and get caught. Well, not even that they get caught, but it's too easy to perform damage when you're a penetration tester, and too many people ignore that. So that's issue one. Issue two, though, is I really like to see people who have experience protecting systems before they go out and try to break in. So, you know, even though it's not a security discipline per se, the best penetration testers I've ever seen were people who started out as system administrators, and then you turn them around and say, hey, I'd like you to work on a pen test and try to break in. They're like, what do you mean? I mean, I want you to, like, do the, you know, he's like, you mean you want me to be one of those people I fought off, you know, 20 times a day for the last 5 years? I'm like, yeah. He's like, oh, that's easy. Because those people who protected systems well are the people who've seen the most attacks. They've seen how to get in. They know the tricks. They know where they've been burned. And those are the best people to go and do a penetration test. And most important, they know how to identify the fixes that it would take on how they would have secured the system better.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Ira, for your time and for your presentation. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Donald Shin. He's a Senior Technical Business Development Manager at Ixia. Since 2013, Donald has marketed Ixia's solution for the exciting and ever-evolving network security and enterprise IT industry. Our security team's goal is to enable enterprises to build secure and optimized networks by leveraging proven methods of validating network and application designs through high-fidelity testing. Donald is a creative, strategic thinker with honed execution skills for complex lifecycle product management. His extremely diverse work experience provides a unique view into all elements of marketing, including hardware engineer, software engineer, FAE. Donald's area of expertise include market needs analysis and roadmap creation, lead cross-functional teams, including partner programs and ecosystem development, public speaking, and negotiation skills. So I'd like to turn the call over to Don for his presentation.
Hey, fantastic. Thank you very much, George. All right, can we flip to the next slide? So during my session, what I'd like to do is expand the whole notion of security testing. Okay, I mean, in your daily job, there's quite a bit more than, you know, there's lots of elements of what you're doing in architecting, deploying and acquiring new technologies, as well as managing change throughout the life cycle of your environment. So, you know, as John had mentioned earlier, there's just the real, next slide please, the real world can be harsh, right? And when we follow people, you know, analysts like John or anything in the press for that matter, of these really catastrophic events that have been happening around breaches or denial of service, it's a harsh world out there. Next slide, please. And whether this happened to you or your organization or if we have the opportunity to read through these and sort of pontificate and look into the crystal ball to try to understand what the heck happened, right? And what can we do about it? And I can tell you for sure, the people that this has occurred to, under their breath, they all say this: I wish I had tested for that. Right? And so, next slide, please. I think what we should do is define security testing. Okay. Now, to begin with, one thing that we also have to recognize is test in many enterprise IT departments is a four-letter word. Right? And it goes along with other four-letter words like cost and slow and it has sort of a do as little as possible, right? But it's a foundation of good design, right? You architect, you implement, you test. But when we talk about security tests, I think that it's important to dimension what that means to have security tests. Now, up to this point, what we've talked about has been around what I would say is vulnerability assessment. Right? So these different processes that you use in order to understand the perimeter and the possibilities for breach and try to plug them, obviously. So we talked extensively about pen testing and vulnerability scanning and code testing. And there's no question, I think that the vast majority of companies today do this. Part of it is compliance. Right? They need evidence that they have done their due diligence, but of course, not always is compliance and secure, are they the same thing? And so we need to consider, well, there's another element of security testing, which is the resilience, right? Or the security resilience testing. And this is understanding your technologies, your people, and your processes in a real environment that is at load and under attack, and how does it withstand it? How fast does it actually recover in that kind of an environment? Right? And you need to do an assessment or security resilience testing, as I said, on technologies, as well as the processes and peoples. And coming up with an assessment of this is going to really say how ready are you for the harsh realities of the real world. Right? And today what we see at Ixia is that there are many large enterprises that do things like this. Right? But once you get past the Fortune 200, it becomes less of a task that enterprises do. And I think that's the point of this portion of it, is to understand that vulnerability assessment and security resilience testing, when you combine these together, it becomes a more complete strategy around security testing as a general statement. Okay, next slide, please. All right, and this has to be done, as the other speakers talked about, not as a one-time event, but something that you're going to do throughout the life cycle of your physical and virtual infrastructure. Now, sort of in the beginning phase is as you're architecting the system and as you're starting to build out the environment, you need to be able to create realistic workloads on how that network and the security products will behave, making choices on what is the right technology to bring in, what's the right configuration to build that towards, and continuing throughout that life cycle. So, as you're monitoring and seeing the deviation, especially drift that occurs as a result of any kind of changes in the architecture or patches that are being rolled out into the technologies, or even policy changes that are being made. Okay. So, next slide, please. So, visually, I think that we think of our world as moving incredibly fast. We talk all about virtualization, DevOps, continuous integration, complete, and it appears like the world is going really fast. But next slide. But the reality of it is that things happen very slowly. Right? And especially this is true when we're talking about deploying new technologies and processes into our environment. Right? I don't think anybody would question that technology is an integral element of building secure, robust networks. But this table here reflects a survey that was done that talks about why is it that these obvious new technologies for enterprises, why do they get rolled out so slowly? Right? And I think that if you happen to be a vendor or you sit on the other side of the table as an IT decision maker, you also can recognize this. And when I read through this report, the thing that I see is that it has a lot to do with a lack of understanding or a lack of information, right? And whenever a decision for deploying a new technology or making a change in the environment, the main thing that the decision maker needs to know is how will this technology behave in my environment? Next slide, please. And security resilience can answer many of these things. So if we step back and think about, well, why is that? Right? And we think about, okay, so I'm going to make a decision on bringing a change or new technology or changing elements of my infrastructure. So we need to ask ourselves, well, how do we make decisions? Right? And if you're like most, what you do is you read data sheets, you look at reports, especially like quadrant reports. As a business guy, I love quadrant reports. Right? They seem to imply that something up and to the right is the better product or a proven technology. But we need to recognize that many of these reports are survey-based and have no definitive testing inside of it. And then we also talk to trusted people inside the, our ecosystem, from resellers and colleagues and whatnot. But the point of this is that this doesn't answer the real question, next slide please, which is how will this technology behave in their environment? So let's take one example of that. And so let's talk about performance as an example, okay? And we can security efficacy as well, but let's first start out with performance, right? That's always a question. So when we look at data sheets in particular and how the numbers are being reported, there's two really standard ways of doing this. One is RFC 2544, which is a 1999 standard that was developed for switching, and you'll see these specs on IP forwarding in particular that are being added inside the data sheets. A more recent spec introduced in 2003 is RFC 3511, which uses HTTP with large object sizes with nothing inside the payload in order to be able to quantify a sort of processing capabilities. But next slide, please. But the reality is that those kinds of underlying kinds of mechanisms for being able to articulate performance or these standard ways of doing things don't really match up with the reality of our modern world, where applications are what drive enterprises, and that we need to recognize that every network is unique. It's running different types of applications on there. The user behavior is different. The number of users obviously are different inside of it as well. Next slide, please. So I thought that what we would do is try to explain this graphically by showing a case study. So this was a large financial institution that was doing something that's being done quite a bit nowadays, which is moving from stateful firewalls to next generation firewalls. Now, they had several goals. One was that they wanted to narrow down to a single vendor in making their decision on this large investment, and they also recognized that the use case inside their environment had very different kinds of behavior depending on the locality of where these firewalls are going to be deployed, whether it was in the office applications, web, partner portal, and the trading portion of it. Now, they did the traditional way of speaking to, narrowing down to some vendors by looking at data sheets, looking at reports, and talking with resellers and trusted parties. And they narrowed down to three particular vendors that they were going to choose. All three vendors advertised 10 gig next generation firewall. Next slide, please. And so what we did was we helped them run a custom POC so that they could make sure that they were confident that they were making the right decision. So we helped them model their environments and create a simulated test that included their unique traffic mixes with the right number of users simulation inside of it, and then added security elements inside of it. And sort of the interesting thing to look at is on the left side, what you see is you always want to begin by baselining. So we used the RFC 3511 to be able to create that theoretical limit of what these products were able to do. And what you see is there was really no discernible information available from that perspective, because all of the products are going to meet their advertised specs. The problem is that that spec itself is really of not much use to the enterprises themselves. Now, when we move over closer to the right, as we look at that modeling the actual behavior of those four locations, of how the traffic patterns and usage patterns would be, now we start to see a very diverse view of how that technology will behave. Each of the three technologies will behave in that particular enterprise's environment, right? And this gave this particular enterprise a much higher level of confidence in that they had made the right decision. And an interesting data point that I want to share with you also is that in this particular instance, it wasn't the incumbent supplier of the firewall. Okay, okay, next slide, please. So I think that we say, okay, well, so what, right? Well, you had confidence that you were making the right decision, but I think it's pretty fair to say that, especially in businesses, it's the financials that drive decisions. So I thought what I would share with you, and by no means is this an apples to apples comparison, but I wanted to show you the diversity of what it costs to be able to deploy a particular technology. If you were to go to, so what I did was I picked 4 vendors that were on this NSS Labs quadrant report, and I picked them based on the fact that they had advertised prices available on CDW as well. Okay, and so it's reasonably similar kind of category products, and if you were to approach any of the vendor salespeople, they would say, yeah, this solution is going to work for you. So if we look at this and we consider what is the average data center security spend that's forecasted in 2015, and understanding that firewalls tend to be something in the 60% range of that spend, we see a huge variation on making the right decision for your enterprise based on these particular 4 choices of a slew that is 10 million all the way down to 3 million. Right? And so this, by understanding how the technology will work in your particular environment, there is a humongous variance and significant cost impact to what you're deploying. Next slide, please. Another consideration that you should think about also is performance and cost are not linear. They tend to go geometrically, right? And so now, once you've made a decision on a vendor or a technology that you want to bring into your environment, how do you right-size the investments? Right? Because it's not a single or a nice smooth match up to exactly what your performance requirements are in that particular location. So if you don't know, right, then what you're going to do is you're going to fall back to derating, and it's going to be based on your experiences with that particular vendor or once again sort of anecdotal information. So you can see here is these are really major steps, and in general, when you do a derating, you're going to overestimate and you're going to spend more than what you actually should have if you had more quantifiable data to make that decision. Next slide, please. But at the end of the day, it's all about protecting yourself from incidences, right? And there's many reports out there that talk about what is the cost impact of breaches and denial of service and other security incidences. But the point of it is that when you do this, once you architect a system, make sure that you're using the right technologies, right-sizing your investments inside of it, you're going to eliminate incidences and raise your confidence level of your network and its technologies. Next slide, please. So this is where, just going back, is that this is something that you can do throughout the whole life cycle of the product. Now, I focused on that initial investment because that's the easiest place to be able to put dollars around why resiliency testing is important and why you should be doing this. But going through that whole cycle, all the way through the drift that occurs in technologies and networks as you're making patches inside of it. So this is something that needs to be done repetitively and have a process associated with it. Next slide, please. So here's the thing is that we've kind of pointed out the importance of being able to test your technologies and your networks at scale under attack and understanding how they defend as well as how fast they recover. But what you see is, as I travel around and talk with many enterprise IT people, is these are the kinds of things that they say. Things like, well, vendors test, so I don't need to. Right? Now, does that, I think that we really need to be careful about that because it is true vendors test. They do extensive testing in Ixia. Our business is the vendors are a cornerstone of our business. But they have different objectives, and they can't replicate your particular environment, nor do they claim to replicate your environment. And things like interoperability, all of the corner cases and things like that are important that you do things. So another one is we contract a pen tester every year to stay compliant, so we don't need to test. Once again, it's important that pen testing is a critical element of security testing, but there's so many other elements of your job that security testing comes into, and you need to really capture the security resilience as well. And then, please, I guess I won't go through all of these, but these are kinds of things that I've heard, and I think to a certain degree, you really need to think about, can you really afford not to do these kinds of things? Next slide, please. So part of the challenge in being able to create these environments in the past is that it's very complicated to be able to create a realistic synthetic workload for the front end for the users, as well as the back end portion of it for creating that realism. And so people have built sort of do-it-yourself testing environments that look a lot like this. Right? There tend to be, if you do it, it's sort of golden cases. Nobody's allowed to touch these systems. When the guy leaves, and nobody knows how to run the system either. And that today, inside our modern technologies, including Ixia and many other vendors as well, is that there's a whole ecosystem available for IT people that can create enterprise and nation-scale testing environments that will generate real-world application traffic, as well as simulating current security attacks and things like fuzzing, as the other gentleman mentioned earlier. And this can be in the hardware format and software format, so that you can put these into virtual environments. Next slide, please. So how do you do this? Right? So using these kinds of technology, you can create scale and complexity and realism that includes both legitimate workloads as well as malicious workloads. And in this particular diagram shows testing a whole network infrastructure of being able to simulate very large loads of users with running the variety of application and testing the whole chain. Next slide. Or you can also use what we refer to in the testing industry as a two-arm test, where we're going to wrap around a particular technology, and we're going to simulate the users as well as simulate the expensive back-end portions that may not readily be able to be tested. Right? And so this is an example of being able to do that, like that firewall, next generation firewall POC that we showed before, as well as being able to deploy into, let's say, a DevOps sprint regression cycle, testing cycle, where you've added scale, realism, and security into that environment. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah. So these are some things that we think that are important for you to consider when you think about security test. Vulnerability assessment is a critical portion, but security resilience is the other portion that you should also consider as you in security testing. Okay, thank you. George, back to you.
All right. Thank you, Don. All right, we have a couple questions here, and as a reminder, hear a little echo on the line. There we go. Still there. All right, let's see if this is better. Do you hear an echo there, Don?
No, I know it's good.
Oh, okay, perfect. All right, we have a few questions here. You bring up the point that vendors test. So why is it important that IT test their infrastructure?
Yeah, and vendors definitely do test, and they do extensive testing. But most of that testing is part of complying to their data sheets inside their QA departments. And it's the challenge for vendors is to be able to tell a customer that they've tested their particular test cases, right? And it's not true, and nor do they ever claim that they have tested each of the actual use cases. And then a second important portion of that is obviously interoperability becomes something that no vendor can guarantee.
All right, I'm trying to fix my echo, but it's still there. Let me ask one more question, and then I'm going to dial back in. Conducting a custom POC before acquiring new security technologies sounds like a sound principle. How expensive is it to do such testing?
Yeah. So I think the important thing to consider, well, there's really a couple things. Let me address that in an indirect way and then a direct way. The indirect way is that historically our customers have found that they are saving in the 30, 40, even 50% of their investments because they are making more sound decisions, right? And that's including making the decision as well as having a negotiating capabilities and then right-sizing their investments, right? So it becomes more of a money maker than something that costs. But in addition to that, what we find is that many enterprises will start by getting Ixia to provide a service which is much less expensive than the equipment, and our resellers also provide these kind of services as well. And then after they've done a few of these, they realize that this is a discipline that they should absorb into their company. So they will actually acquire the technology in the long run, so that they have this continuous cycle that's occurring. So I don't think I answered it directly, but our software product is $10,000 as an example. Oh, did George say that he was dialing back in?
Yes, I am back. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hopefully the echo's gone.
Yeah, actually, this is Ira. I think David Shin. He might have it on speaker, which then feeds back into the microphone because he's the only one who's not echoing.
Oh, I'm not on speaker. I'm on headset.
All right, test. Yeah, there's still a bit of echo. I will ask the question slowly as we move on to the open discussion, and I think the echo's gone. All right, so we're going to move to open discussion. We encourage you, the audience, to submit questions at any time via the chat box, and we have a few questions here already queued up. So we'll start with one of them. I'm a CH consultant that works with small, medium business. I've noticed most don't even have a simple security or BYOD policy, so we're talking about small and medium businesses here. Don't you think that is a foundation and most important first step? Anyone want to take this, or I'll select someone?
Yeah, this is John. I'll take that, because if you look at that PCI Unleashed framework that I showed in my section, which albeit was a fair bit ago, but if you can remember back that far, we start at the policy, right? Policy is requirement 12 of PCI, but we put that as the first step. So yeah, definitely you have to have a policy. You have to know what you want to accomplish before you accomplish it. You have to set some goals. The problem with policies is that people tend to stop there. Oh, we wrote it down. Isn't that good enough? No, you actually have to do something. So all those things, he's definitely right. You have to have a policy.
Excellent, thank you. Another question here. I'll take the first stab at the first part, and then someone can answer the other one. The question was, is there any reason why Backtrack is not on the list? And this was to the second presentation that Eric gave, where he listed Kali Linux. And Kali is the latest version of Backtrack. It was renamed I think over a year ago now, so it's the new version of Backtrack, and it's called Kali, K-A-L-Y, L-I. The follow-up question to that is, are the pen test toolkits free, and if so, where can they be found?
So some of the pen test toolkits are free. The references that I put out there, so for instance, the Kali Linux, kali.org is one of the places you can look there. And also the OWASP pages are really, really good at providing for the web pen test apps. Again, the fact that it's free may not necessarily be good, other than it's a good start anyway to see, and then if it doesn't do what you need it to do, then you can switch to one of the commercial ones.
Excellent. All right, let me look here, and thank you all for the questions. Here's one. I am a student that understands that InfoSec is here to stay. What skills and certs would you recommend? This first student. This may be a little novice for this discussion, but an important one for the continuation of the industry. And of course, we always welcome students to ISSA. There's a special membership for students, so we appreciate the question. So for starters, maybe Ira wants to take this one.
Yeah. I'll go back to what I said before about what makes a good pen tester. Before you go into security, get good general background in computers as a whole. Security, in my opinion, is not an entry-level position, and frankly, if you go in as an entry-level position, you're doing yourself a disservice because you'll look like a fool telling an administrator who's been there for 10 years how to better secure a system. So you'll be much better off as a security professional and a computer professional if you start looking for general computer responsibilities such as database admin, such as system design, such as programming, such as system administration, such as anything else but security.
Excellent. And a follow-up question to that is there any simulations or hacker type of games that students or those new to pen test can leverage to start practicing and learning pen testing?
This is John.
Actually, go ahead, John. I heard you speak first.
Okay. Offensive security has a starter course, and it actually supports all our all of us friends, I'm sure, with Johnny Long, the guy who did Google hacking, his Hackers for Charity thing. So offensive security has a really nice way to get started in that, I think.
Excellent, thank you. And I believe someone else was going to answer as well.
Yeah, I think, yeah, this is Don Chin. Well, one of the areas that we see quite a bit of growth, this has been happening inside the government kinds of agencies quite a bit for training their people, and that's the implementing cyber ranges where they're doing red team, blue team exercises. But in addition to the government side, once they're in the field, what we see is a lot of this happening inside the universities. We've been pulled in quite a bit where they're putting exercise programs in place so that the students can actually get a real-world experience of what it feels like to be able to operate a SOC or that experience of being under attack. And so I think that's an important thing to make sure that and look around within your university to see if there's some programs where you can actually get into a red team, blue team exercise in a cyber range.
Yeah, and George, one other place that works is SANS has some really good programs, and I believe they have student rates.
I'm sorry, the echo was pretty bad there.
Yeah, I'm hearing the echo as well. Let's try this again. So SANS Institute has some really good programs, and they do have, I believe they actually have some of the Capture the Flag games available for universities.
Excellent. Yes, I've actually participated in some of those, so definitely a great resource to check out. Moving over to another question here, related to pen testing applications are hosted by a third party or cloud-based. What is the recommendation there? Are those things that we are able to pen test, and if so, how? And I guess we could go to John first on this. Or go ahead.
This is John. Yeah, I'll just take a look at this. You can pen test things in the cloud in certain ways. There's some nuances. You know, Amazon or Rackspace or any of those people don't want you throwing a bunch of stuff at it. There are ways to really do vulnerability assessments in the cloud using technologies that essentially use account rights to find vulnerabilities. So there's ways to do it. I'm sure there'll be new ways to do it as well. There'll be some exciting stuff coming out, but you can do it. But don't use the same methodology that you use on your own network, because you don't own Amazon's network or Microsoft's network or Rackspace's network.
Excellent, thank you. Another question here, and it's related to bug bounties. So recently, a major airline reported that they have given out quite a bit of miles for bug bounties. Does anyone have any feedback or any comments on bug bounty programs and how to leverage them?
I would say that if you're going to go ahead and issue a bug bounty program, it's a good thing, because frankly there are people who are in the criminal underground paying for these bug bounties as well. So I'd rather see a company being able to gather those bugs and proactively fix them. The rewards just have to, frankly, be a little bit better than what the criminals are going to pay for them, depending upon who you're dealing with. Because, again, we really want to make sure we get the zero-day exploits patched as quickly as possible. And if bug bounties are a good way, because really what you're essentially doing is somebody's essentially testing your software for free. And if they're testing your software for free, you need to reward them, because clearly your own internal testing failed at a certain level.
Yeah, I'll add something to that. I think it was a few years ago at RSA that somebody did a study on bug bounty programs, and they found out that the black market for bugs for 0 days is about an order of magnitude above what commercial bug bounty programs can pay. So I think what we were looking at for United was 1 million miles that they handed out. That means that whoever sells that on the black market would get 10 times that. I don't think that white hat bug bounty programs will ever be able to pay the kind of money that the black hat ones do, but it's still, as Ira says, it's free research that you're getting expert free research for a very, very low cost. And there are still some security researchers out there, hopefully a lot of security researchers out there, that have higher morals than sending to the black hats these bugs. Not all, but hopefully a majority. And again, anything you can get is a bonus to you. And so, yes, you should remunerate the security researchers that have done the bug finding for you.
Excellent, thank you. All right, we have time for one more question here, and this one's, I'll even open it up to all Internet of Things. So the question's mostly related to UAVs or drones and how they use GPS and wireless technology, and what can someone do after making a large investment in one of these to protect themselves and not let their drone be taken over or hacked. Anyone, maybe John with your wireless background, have any tips for anyone, any drone aficionados that we have here asking these questions?
Well, you know, somebody asked me that over Twitter too, and I'm not enough of a drone person to know, but I would assume that you would want to try to do the same things that you would do over a regular wireless network, connect to it via VPN, monitor what's going on, but I don't know the ability of the asset, the drone itself, to support some of that technology. So what I find is that a lot of wireless technology, or even things that fall under the Internet of Things category, is very difficult to secure because it's not built to allow that kind of security. And so those are going to be a lot of the things that we face in the future. But, you know, standard encryption, VPN, using WPA2, which has some encryption built into it as well. Those kinds of things I think are just basic best practices, but I'm not a droner myself other than when I talk on these webinars.
Right. Excellent. Yeah, and just overall, many of the items that are Internet of Things, we kind of just have to buy them and use what they have. They, apply patches when the vendor releases it, and the Jeep is a perfect example with some of the latest news of being able to control them or hack them, and they had to recall a number of vehicles to get the updates through USB. So sometimes, most of the time, you are at the mercy of the vendor. This, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today. I do want to thank everyone for participating in the ISSA web conference, and thank you all for the excellent questions. Lastly, I would like to say thank you to today's speakers, John, Narek, Ira, and Don, for lending their time and expertise to the ISSA educational program. I'd also like to turn it over and thank the ISSA international staff and have them provide some final closing comments.
Hi, we'd like to thank Ixia for sponsoring today's ISSA web conference. We also thank Citrix for donating the GoToWebinar service to ISSA, allowing us to present this program today. Please feel free to continue the conversations on ISSA's social media sites, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Google+. Within 24 hours of the conclusion of this webcast, you will receive a follow-up email which contains information on the web conference quiz. After the successful completion of the quiz, you will be given an opportunity to print a certificate of attendance to use for the submission of CPE credits. Thank you for your time and participation. This concludes today's broadcast.